The Enlightenment was a European intellectual movement of the late 17th and 18th centuries, emphasizing reason and individualism rather than tradition. In essence, this meant that people were beginning to think for themselves, rather than do exactly what the church wanted them to. The emergence of the Enlightenment was characterized by Immanuel Kant. In his works, he described the concept of reason, a word most commonly used when discussing the Enlightenment. He described reason as man's leaving his self-caused immaturity. By this, he meant that man was able to, and therefore should, create their own knowledge. Kant was the father of the Enlightenment. Philosophers were literary people, professors, journalists, statesmen, and political scientists, but especially social reformers. They ranged from the nobility and the middle class to sometimes even the lower class. As the Enlightenment was enhanced by French culture, the French philosophers were the most influential to the rest of the world. They wanted to change the world with their philosophies, not just discuss it. Many were not free to publish what they wrote, but over time, getting around state censorships wasn't difficult. The most well-known philosophers were MonTAYsquieu, Voltaire, and Diderot. Salon meetings were meetings where philosophers and guests engaged in witty conversations about the ideas of the philosophers. Women often hosted these salon meetings in the drawing rooms of their homes in order to spread the ideas of the Enlightenment. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a French philosopher. He had two major works. His discourse on the origins of the inequality of mankind discussed humans in their primitive stage. There were no laws, no judges, and all people were equal. He also said that government was an evil, but a necessary one. His second major work was The Social Contract. The Social Contract is Rousseau's celebrated treatise published in 1762. Through this, Rousseau was trying to harmonize individual liberty with governmental authority. The social contract was an agreement stating that an entire society was to be governed by its general will. General will being the consensus of the entire society and the representation of the community's highest aspirations. He believed everybody was responsible for creating the general will. Through the social contract, Rousseau expressed his idea that liberty was to be achieved through being forced to follow what was best for the people. Another influential work by Rousseau was Hamel, a work on education. He believed education should foster rather than restrict children's natural instincts. Also, Rousseau's emphasis on heart and sentiment made him a precursor of the intellectual movement called Romanticism. Adam Smith was a Scottish philosopher and came up with the idea of laissez-faire, meaning let the people do as they choose. In his work, Inquiry into the Nations and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, three basic principles of economics were addressed. He first condemned the use of tariffs to protect home industries. Secondly, he said that labor of individual farmers, artisans, and merchants constituted the true wealth of a nation. Lastly, the state should not interfere with economic matters. He believed the government should have only three basic functions: to protect society from invasion, to defend individuals from injustice and oppression, and to keep up certain public works, such as roads and canals. Adam Smith laid the foundation for what became known in the 19th century as economic liberalism. John Locke was an English philosopher who denied Descartes' belief in innate ideas. He argued that every person was born with a tabula rasa. Tabula rasa was John Locke's belief that everyone is born with a blank mind. He said that the knowledge we receive and develop comes from our environment and surroundings, not from heredity, reason, or faith. People become who they are based off of their surroundings and the experiences they come across throughout their lives. These ideas were showcased in his essay concerning human understanding. In his two treatises on government, his ideas were used to support demands for a constitutional government, the rule of law, and the protection of rights. Possibly the greatest figure of the Enlightenment was Voltaire, who started out as a young playwright and eventually became a philosopher. In his philosophic letters on the English, written in 1733, he expressed a deep admiration of English life, especially its freedom of the press, political freedom, and religious toleration. He soon, through his writings, became wealthy and began to write a vast amount of pamphlets, novels, plays, letters, and histories. In 1763, he penned his treatise on toleration, where he argued religious toleration did not cause problems. Voltaire, like many other philosophers, believed in deism. Deism is defined as the belief in God as the creator of the universe who, after setting it in motion, ceased to have any direct involvement in it and allowed it to run according to its own natural laws. Deism was built off the Newtonian world machine idea. Many philosophers believed in deism, due to the fact that they believed God had no direct involvement in the world he created. God did not answer prayers as believed, and Jesus was not considered to be divine. Voltaire championed deism the most out of the philosophers due to the fact that he pushed for religious toleration throughout his main works. Baron de Montesquieu was a French philosopher who received a classical education and studied law. His first work was the Persian Letters in 1721, which criticized French institutions, especially the Catholic Church and the French monarchy. He published his most famous work in 1748. It was a comparative study of government in which Montesquieu attempted to apply the scientific method to the social and political arena to ascertain the natural laws governing the social relationships of human beings. There were three basic kinds of governments: republics, suitable for small states; monarchies, suitable for middle-sized states; and despotism, suitable for large empires. One of his lasting contributions to political thought was the importance of checks and balances created by a separation of powers. Enlightened despotism, otherwise known as enlightened absolutism, is an absolute monarchy in which the ruler follows the principles of the Enlightenment by introducing reforms to improve society. Examples of these types of reforms would be religious toleration, freedom of speech, or a rise in education. Enlightened despotism rose in the late 18th century with the rise of monarchs, such as Catherine the Great, Joseph II, and Frederick II, who followed the advice of philosophers for at least part of their rule. Catherine the Great of Russia was what we call an enlightened despot. During her reign, she did many things that were considered absolutist. She increased the power of the nobility because her power depended on their support, chartered the nobility, furthered serfdom, was an autocrat, and overall was not responsible for any drastic reforms in Russia. On the other hand, she greatly supported the ideas and works of the Enlightenment. She was fascinated by the works of philosophers and invited Denis Diderot, publisher of the Encyclopedia, and Voltaire to live at her estate to keep them and their ideas nearby. She wanted to spread the ideas of the Enlightenment throughout Russia. Along with these intentions, the Enlightenment inspired her to code laws in the state, create schools, and provide limited religious toleration. Diderot, another enlightened thinker, published the Encyclopedia, which was also known as the Classified Dictionary of the Sciences, Arts, and Trades. The goal of the Encyclopedia was to spread knowledge of these subject areas and inspire people to be enlightened and rethink their ideals. This work helped to inspire philosophers to attack religious superstition and advocate toleration, and to make social, political, and legal improvements throughout their states. The wide publication caused many people to become more educated and therefore form their own opinions. Frederick II was another enlightened despot from Prussia. As far as despotic policies, he practiced mercantilism and tried to make the middle class resign. On the other end of his rule, he practiced enlightened ideas. He, like Catherine, was supportive of the enlightened thinkers and attempted to incorporate enlightened ideas into his reign in Prussia. He levied taxes on the Jews, practiced partial tolerance and a partial ban on torture, made available education, and abolished serfdom. He also saw himself as the first servant of the state, which meant that he believed he had a responsibility to his people rather than to his own agenda. This idea was nearly unheard of during this time. Frederick II desperately wanted the Austrian territory of Silesia. However, Austria already had its own problems going on internally. The Habsburg Emperor Charles VI could not produce a male heir to the Austrian throne. In an attempt to secure his daughter's succession to the throne, he issued the Pragmatic Sanction in 1713. The Pragmatic Sanction made other European powers recognize his daughter, Maria Theresa, as his legal heir. After Charles VI's death, the Pragmatic Sanction was pushed aside, especially by Frederick II. Frederick II soon invaded the Austrian territory of Silesia. France joined in the war against Austria due to their long-standing rivalry. Maria Theresa quickly made an alliance with Great Britain. The Peace Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748 ended the war and agreed to return all conquered territories to their original owners, with the exception of Silesia. Silesia remained under Prussian control, much to the annoyance of Maria Theresa. Maria Theresa refused to accept the loss of Silesia, and this led to the 7 Years' War. In 1756, a diplomatic revolution occurred in Europe. Britain and France had rivalries over colonial empires, and Austria and Prussia had rivalries over Silesia. France allied with Austria against Prussia, going against their long-standing rivalry. Russia soon joined the alliance with France and Austria because Prussia was seen as a hindrance to Russian goals in Central Europe. Great Britain now allied with Prussia. This war occurred on 3 main fronts. The first front was Europe. The Battle of Rossbach in 1757 was won by Frederick the Great. He won against combined French and Austrian forces. Soon, Frederick slowly began to wear down as he was attacked from 3 different directions as Russia joined in the attack. When Peter III took over as Tsar of Russia, he pulled troops out of Prussia in the rest of the conflict. The Peace of Hubertsburg in 1763 ended the war in Europe. All occupied territories were returned to the original owners, but Austria was forced to recognize Prussia's permanent control over Silesia. The second front of the 7 Years' War was India. This was where the Great War for Empire took place. This was an Anglo-French struggle for control of India. Each side supported opposing Indian princes, but eventually the British proved victorious. The third front of the 7 Years' War was the Americas. The French and Indian War was an Anglo-French struggle in North America. British citizens thought that the French were trying to cut off their westward expansion. The French allied with the Native Americans and formed a fearsome alliance. However, the British Navy defeated French naval forces and soon began to capture French forts. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris was signed, officially ending the 7 Years' War. India was left to Britain. French ceded Canada and lands east of the Mississippi to the British. Spain, France's ally, gave Spanish Florida to Britain, and in return, France gave the Louisiana Territory to Spain. While all of this was occurring, Poland's legislature was crumbling. They issued a policy of liberum veto. This was a unanimity voting rule that allowed any member of the legislature to force an immediate end to the current session and nullify any legislation that had already been passed at the session. It was based on the premise that since all Polish noblemen were equal, every measure that came before the legislature had to be passed unanimously. It allowed the legislature to check royal power.
Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow. I know you're Catholic and I'm Voltaire, but every religion should be fair. You want my essays, you want my ideas, and we will enlighten all of Europe. Are we genius? Not playing. We're philosophes. What are you saying? We need a contract that's a prize, or else these monarchs will lead to our demise. JJ, 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 all like JJ, Rosé, let's mass compromise. And MonTAYsquieu would have done whatever to make sure that we could rule. However, if the market don't come through, the market will renew. You can buy anything without governing. Economy's in pieces, Smith fix me. And just shake me till you wake me from this bad dream. The economy's going down, down, down. And I just can't believe Adam Smith isn't still around. And I'm like, laissez, laissez, laissez faire. Like, laissez, laissez, laissez faire. Like, laissez, laissez, laissez faire. I thought you'd always be mine, mine. Laissez, laissez, laissez faire. Oh, laissez, laissez, laissez faire. Like, laissez, laissez, laissez faire. I thought you'd always be mine, mine.
Charles, when I was still king, I had my first love. There was nobody that compared to my daughter, and nobody could take power, could ever come above. Frederick too was crazy. He was power struck. He invaded me daily. Didn't need no backup. Celestia made his heart pound. Skipped a beat when he saw us coming fleet, and he knew he was gonna win, but he didn't want the war to end. Pressure knows she's got me dazing, cause she fought so amazing. And Maria's heart is breaking, and she just keeps on saying,
Celestia, 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 oh, like Celestia, 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 oh, like Celestia, 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 oh, like, thought you'd always be mine, mine. Celestia, 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 oh, like Celestia, 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 oh, like Celestia, 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 oh, like I thought you'd always be mine. Now it's gone. Now it's gone. Now it's gone. Now it's gone. It's gone.